When people die, it's up to the rest of us who are still here to tell their life stories. That's how they live on. And that's why we call this podcast Immortalized. Welcome to Immortalized. I am Stephen Segal from Legacy.com, the world's largest network of obituaries. And my co-host is Linnea Crowther, Legacy's news editor and lead obituary writer.
Hi.
So, this week, a really well-known comedian died, Norm Macdonald, from Saturday Night Live. And I noticed something interesting, which is that at the same time that people are mourning his death from cancer at only 61, they're not just expressing their sadness. They're also sharing all the funny things that he said throughout his whole lifetime.
Yeah, I saw actually a couple people on Twitter say, can't this just be what Twitter always is? Everybody sharing all the funniest things that Norm Macdonald said? Because that's a great way to remember somebody who was funny, or even just to remember the funny moments that we had with somebody who wasn't, a professional comedian. And it turns out that humor and laughter can be a really big part of grieving and coping with someone's death. It helps us remember all those funny times, all the happy memories that we had with that person. And it can help us remember and hold on to that perspective that death really is a normal part of everybody's life.
For sure.
So you know that here at Legacy.com, we sometimes do see humor in the obituaries that people's families write and publish for them. In fact, it's becoming more and more frequent. It's obviously not a choice that's appropriate for every family, for every obituary, but for some people, a funny obituary is maybe how they take ownership of that death.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but there is a power in laughing at something, isn't there?
Absolutely, yeah. Although I think that that's something that has been going on for a very long time, needing to laugh sometimes even in those darkest moments. Humor in obituaries is newer. This isn't something that you would have seen often, if at all, in the obituary pages of the newspaper 50 years ago. But today, I would say in the past 15 or so years, this has become increasingly common to see funny obituaries of all different types. I think that one big difference between the past 15 years and, 50 years ago is social media. Obituaries are shared frequently. So many people want to share their loved one's obituary after it's published to make sure they're spreading the news, to make sure people read the loving words that they wrote. And I think that with sharing obituaries becoming so common, it encourages people to be a little bit more unique when they write an obit for their loved one. So many people are going to get a chance to see it, and maybe you'll get a chance to get more people to care about your loved one's life and to notice it, to maybe donate to that charity that you've designated in remembrance of them, or even just to realize what a great person it was that you wrote an obituary for.
So today, let's look at these funny obituaries that families have written, that have been published, that people have seen and laughed with and shared with other readers. We tend to notice, loosely speaking, I would say maybe 4 different categories of funny obituaries. And we're going to look at each one of these today. And the first one of those categories is people whose families feel like their obituary just has to salute their colorful personality.
This is something that you can do in a big way or a small way. An obituary can have just a sentence or two that really acknowledges what a funny or wacky person we're paying tribute to. Or the entire obituary can be funny and wacky, just like that person. So here's an excerpt from one of those. This is an obituary from just last year, 2020, for Stephen Cusano of Oakhurst, New Jersey. This was published in the Asbury Park Press. When the doctors told us he was a very sick man, our first thought was, you have no idea. His regrets were few, but included eating some of his wife's attempts at cooking and that he wasn't born a century earlier. His wife also had a few, including having to replace 2 cast iron pedestal mailboxes as well as 3 garage doors in the past 12 months, thanks to his inability to judge distance in his 92 Chevy pickup. We're leaving a bright orange traffic safety cone in front of the newest garage door as our shrine to him.
This is something that I feel like we see more and more of, these little snapshots of the deceased's relationship with their family, in very specific.
And funny details like that, yeah, like you say, very specific. Back in the day, 50 years ago, as we were talking about before, obituaries were pretty short typically and would not get into anything like this kind of detail about what made Stephen Cusano unique. So here's a similarly funny, wacky obituary for a woman named Marie McNally. This was also just last year, and it was published in the Tampa Bay Times. She had a very eclectic sense of style. Oh, let me say, I believe this was written by her daughter. So again, she had a very eclectic sense of style. She's been trying to push off an embroidered leather poncho onto me for years. She loved animals, hated spiders, and she cared immensely for those who were lucky enough to know her. She loved Usher, hated Kanye, and thought Clint Eastwood was a sexy son of a bitch. She loved to love you from afar because surely if you were around her too much, you would get on her nerves. She loved cars, old and new, and she loved White Castle burgers. She is being sent off into eternity with some of her favorite things, and she surely would bust out laughing if she knew what was going with her.
You know, that makes me smile.
Yeah.
Like, I can imagine someone being very proper and thinking that was disrespectful, but that gives me a picture of this woman. Like, I feel like I know her a little better because her daughter had fun describing her.
And I think that for the people who really did know her, this is probably bringing back all kinds of favorite memories. And I bet there were people just laughing uproariously when they read what her daughter wrote about her.
So a similar one was one that I came across in the Arizona Daily Star in Tucson, Arizona. This was for Charles Morris, who died in 2019. And part of the obituary read, Chaz leaves behind hundreds of friends, fans, students, a loving and tolerant family, and more than a few disappointed ladies. He also leaves behind the cat from hell, Scooter, who will reside with his sister, Samantha, who lost 2 out of 3 at Rochambeau. He taught ESL from the southwestern USA all the way to China, with such important linguistic lessons as when to use my bad, dude, and right on. He never missed a comeback, adventure, or an opportunity to tell you he was right. I put typos and run-on sentences in this just to see if he'll show up and correct me. A final fiesta to expose all the felonies he could have been arrested for will be held on Sunday, date, etc. There will be appetizers and a cash bar because we know Charlie's friends and we are not stupid.
I really like that last bit of that one. That's so good. A lot of these funny obituaries that people wrote for their loved ones are a little bit not self-deprecating, but I think you can kind of see how the deceased may have been self-deprecating about themselves and their life, and their family kind of carried that on. And they talk about, the things that were great and funny about them, but then also the things that they didn't do so well. So here's one of those. This was published just this year, 2021, for Gwen Rawlings of Prince George, British Columbia, and it was in the Prince George Citizen. She loved gardening and really sucked at driving. Jumping curbs and tailgating were her strong points. We were always welcomed home by Mom's boisterous voice belting out a song as we walked through the front door. Catching her mid-song, she always paused for a quick, "Hi, honey." Mom was, as Dad used to say, sharp as a tack and could often be found lost in a novel, doing crosswords and kicking her friends' butts in Scrabble. Most notably, though, was her wicked sense of humor. Gwen the party chicken was never unnoticed at gatherings. I have no idea about Gwen the party chicken, but I feel like I can picture Gwen the party chicken, right?
I feel like just hearing that people called her Gwen the Party Chicken, or she called herself Gwen the Party Chicken, we don't know. But it's a little bit of insight that brings us that much closer to that memory. Another one of these that I noticed that also brought perspective from the deceased's children and grandchildren was an obituary in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel for Mary Mullaney of Shorewood, Wisconsin. And this is a slightly older one. This is from back in 2013. And Mary Mullaney's nickname was Pink. It's a long, lovely obituary, but here's a bit of it. We were blessed to learn many valuable lessons from Pink during her 85 years. Among them, never throw away old pantyhose. Use the old ones to tie gutters, child-proof cabinets, tie toilet flappers, or hang Christmas ornaments. Also, if a possum takes up residence in your shed, grab a barbecue brush to coax him out. If he doesn't leave, brush him for 20 minutes and let him stay. Invite new friends to Thanksgiving dinner. If they are from another country and you have trouble understanding them, learn to listen with an accent. Never say mean things about anybody. They are poor souls to pray for. Put picky eating children in the box at the bottom of the laundry chute. Tell them they are hungry lions in a cage and feed them veggies through the slats. Take magazines you've already read to your doctor's office for others to enjoy. Do not tear off the mailing label. Quote, because if someone wants to contact me, that would be nice. In her lifetime, Pink made contact time after time.
My favorite part of that one is brushing the possum with the barbecue brush. I mean, how could that not have happened in her life? And that is great.
I assume these are all real stories,
Yeah.
the way it's told. And I have to say, if I had heard the advice about when the kids won't eat, tell them they're zoo animals and feed them through the bars, like I absolutely believe that worked, and I would
Yeah.
try that. Darn it, all the kids I know are too old now.
Well, keep that in mind, anyone who's listening. So another category of humorous obituaries that we see is obituaries that are clearly imagining fictionalized life stories, offering a bit of romance and adventure in a life that maybe didn't have that romance and adventure in reality.
Or, if it did, maybe they wanted to make sure to capture it for posterity.
True.
Sometimes these are long and elaborate. Sometimes they're very simple moments in passing. There was one of these that appeared in 2017 in the Tyler Morning Telegraph in Texas. And this was for Price Mackenzie Davis. And the relevant line simply said, Price was killed when he rushed into a burning pet store to save a litter of purring, adorable kittens. Or maybe not. We all know how he liked to tell stories, which is extra funny to me because obviously he can't tell that story because he's dead now.
Right.
Someone else told this story and they're blaming it on poor Price.
But who knows? Maybe this is what he said. When I die, this is what I want my obituary to say, how I died. Who knows? We don't know that.
And I think a lot of times that probably is the case, right? This sort of last wish, we do see a lot of obituaries that aren't necessarily funny, but they talk about, their last wish was X.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of times that involves what the obituary says.
Mm-hmm. Well, so some of these fantasy lives imagined in obituaries go on a little bit longer than that one. So here's one that is somewhat older. This is from 2014 from the Minneapolis Star Tribune. And it was for Aaron Joseph Permort, who was just 35 when he died peacefully at home after complications from a radioactive spider bite that led to years of crime fighting and a years-long battle with the nefarious criminal named Cancer, who has plagued our society for far too long. Civilians will recognize him best as Spider-Man and thank him for his many years of service protecting our city. His family knew him only as a kind and mild-mannered art director, a designer of websites and t-shirts and concert posters who always had the right cardigan and the right thing to say, even if it was wildly inappropriate. Aaron was known for his long, entertaining stories, which he loved to repeat often. But then there's one more bit to this. It goes on to tell more about his life and all those details, but at the very end it says, he is survived by his parents, their names, father, sisters, first wife, Gwen Stefani, current wife, Nora, and their son, Ralph, who will grow up to avenge his father's untimely death.
In case there's any confusion, his widow, Nora, after this was published and the obituary got rather a bit of attention in the media, it was made clear that, The bit about his first wife, Gwen Stefani, the rock star, of course, was also part of the joke. That's not true.
Right.
It is worth noting that his wife, Nora McInerney, has gone on to be a noted author about grief and widowhood. Her first book was titled The Hot Widows Club, and some people may have seen her TED Talk a couple years ago about living with grief. She, among other things, discussed the fact that she and Aaron wrote his obituary together, and while it was sad to do so, it was also a wonderful, beautiful opportunity to spend that time doing that with him. And I think
Mhm.
that's something we probably see in a lot of these obituaries, is that they were, a sort of last thing for the family to do together.
Yeah, we don't always know when that's the case, but certainly there are a lot of times, and especially in these obituaries that are full of character, when the deceased had an input into it before they died.
One of my favorite obituaries in this category of imaginary things that didn't happen was one that was published last year in the Express Times in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. This was for Stephen Durfee, and the obituary reads, "Please read the following in your best Dana Carvey as Tom Brokaw impression. Stephen Durfee died today. He was mauled senselessly by a circus lion in a convenience store. He was 52."
That's pretty good.
I appreciate that they told us how we
Yeah.
should hear these words.
Yeah, directions. I like that. So here's another category of lighthearted obituaries. Obituaries that approach the topic of death with dry wit, and apparently the drier the better in some of these examples.
Yeah, these are the ones that go straight at the idea of, we don't want you to spend all of your emotions on sadness. We want you to remember that this person would have wanted you to be happy. There was one this year that could not be any more literal about it. This was in the Houston Chronicle. This was for Roy Reynolds, and it reads, "Roy Richard Reynolds rode off into the sunset. He requests that you not make that big a deal about it."
And that's the entire obit, right?
That, in fact, is the whole obit.
I love it. Another one from this year was for Samuel Reber, I believe, in the Times Reporter from New Philadelphia, Ohio. With all of Sam's accomplishments, he was a great procrastinator. This led him to being 1 pint shy of 30 gallons of donated blood, one state, Nevada, shy of visiting all 50, and some might even say that he was one card short of a full deck. Well, he was, so if anyone has the Four of Hearts from a World War II deck, give us a call.
See, as a great procrastinator myself, I have all the feels about this one. It is funny. It does make me smile. At the same time that this is intended to be humorous, I think it's also absolutely poignant.
Yeah.
There was one that I smiled at in the Salt Lake Tribune. This was from 2018, and this is the obituary for Philip Thorpe. And it begins, "His grave marker will read, 'This corpse is Phil Thorpe's.' Claude, as he was called by even those who knew his name, lived such a boring life that watching paint dry caused him to hyperventilate. His accomplishments will be published at a later date, if any are discovered. He served as an artillery officer in the U.S. Army. Canada wouldn't take him because, so they said, they don't go to war much up there. He served 3 missions for the LDS Church, but they stopped sending him because he always came back."
This obituary just goes on and on. It's so ridiculous and funny.
See, I feel like even though this one is written in the third person, I feel like Phil Thorpe wrote this himself.
I think he probably wrote this himself. It's a stitch. Here's one that was written way back in 2014 for the Richmond County Daily Journal, written about Richard Bacon. Richard Bacon of Lumberton has left the building. His friends will tell you he's in a better place. The rest will say they can smell the bacon burning. Bacon is capitalized. And then at the very end is a great little bit that is based on something that really does happen sometimes. Well, here, I'll just say it. To the crooks reading this, we left an armed guard and the 4 killer dogs home from the luncheon. If you come to steal, they will hurt you.
This is a response to the idea that there are sometimes burglars reading the obits to find out when houses will be empty because everyone's at a funeral.
Yeah. And this really happens sometimes, is that there will be a break-in during the funeral and it's awful. Well,
Not at Richard Bacon's house.
yeah, here's one way to make that not happen.
There was an obit in the Times-Picayune of New Orleans back in 2016 for Mr. William Ziegler. And I believe this is one that was pretty widely shared and went viral at the time because it was just so upbeat. The line that stuck with me was, "Unlike previous times, this is not a ploy to avoid creditors or old girlfriends. He assures us that he is gone. He will be greatly missed."
A lot of these funny ones do go at least moderately viral. And there was one earlier this year that went really viral from the Omaha World Herald for Eric Sauser, maybe? Sauser? Eric loved, in this order, his smoking hot wife, his brilliant kids and family, his many friends, the Boston Red Sox, the Kansas City Chiefs before being a Chiefs fan was cool, the Huskers, Liverpool football, QT iced tea, Adidas sneakers, fishing, backpacking, hiking, hunting, and any old Chevy he saw on the road. Eric hated sad stories, beets, like the vegetable, romantic comedies, a snow-packed driveway, and turning off the garage light. That's it. Eric was content with most everything else. We are not positive, but we think the cause of death was either leukemia or, more likely, being dead sexy.
It seemed like that last line in particular really captured people's sense of whimsy, and
Yeah.
they appreciated the idea of appreciating someone like that even in their obituary.
Yeah.
There was one this year in the Dayton Daily News in Ohio for Robert Barlett. Let's just read the beginning. "A longtime resident of Oakwood, Ohio, is now a dead person. He is no more. He is deceased. He has expired, and he has rung down the curtain and gone to meet his maker. All this happened on Friday, the 16th of April, 2021. His spirit was released from his worldly and worn-out shell of a body, and he is now exploring the wonders of the hereafter. He was predeceased in death by his tonsils and adenoids in 1945, portions of his heart in a quadruple bypass in 1999, his right hip in 2009, more of his heart in 2 subsequent ablations, his original aortic and tricuspid heart valves on December 12, 2012, and parts of numerous other internal organs in March 2015. When we referred to him as a shell, we weren't kidding." And there's two different jokes going on here. The first part of that is a sort of oblique reference to a classic Monty Python comedy sketch about a dead parrot. And then they go on to sort of poke fun at the traditional obituary form of announcing what family members have died before someone by instead announcing what parts of him died.
Yes, right.
I thought that was clever.
It was good. One more from this category of dry to ultra dry humor was back from 2014 in the Journal and Courier in Indiana for Karen Short. Her last wish is to have the song "Another One Bites the Dust" played at her memorial. She wants her gold teeth back from the dentist that yanked them. Those were her teeth to keep. If you have no cash to donate, Karen would like you to consider visiting your local farmer's market, hiking a local park, or making some homemade chicken noodle soup next time your neighbor is sick. Or, as a last resort, pay your next restaurant bill with all $1 bills just to make them wonder how you got them.
Speaks for itself.
Yeah.
So there's one last category of funny obituaries to talk about, and that's first-person obituaries. These are people who had something they really wanted to say before they left, so they took the mic themselves.
This has become more and more popular in maybe the last 10 to 12 years. And not all first person obituaries are funny. In fact, we've read some that are really poignant and heartbreaking. But a lot of the time, when someone wanted to write their own obituary, it was because they knew that they were a funny person and that they could best get that across themselves. One is from just this year in the Toledo Blade for Thomas Flanagan. Here's part of it. Well, that's it. I have completed my shift as the great American cliche. In the spirit of what turned out to be my last New Year's letter, my wild and crazy life has again taken a new, unexpected turn with my shocking and unexpected, yet fabulous exit. Yes, I have joined the likes of Princess Diana, John Belushi, and Steve Irwin the Crocodile Hunter in leaving while still at the top of my game as an iconic superhero who seemed almost too good to be true. I know it's impossible to believe, but I, the ginger god of surgery and shenanigans, have fought my last cow and ridden off into the glorious sunset after re enlisting with a new unit. Due to the unknown and cosmic nature of my next mission, this will be our last communication. It will self destruct in 5 minutes. My whereabouts are now top secret, but let's just say I've made some new friends by the names of Elvis and Kenny. The Church of Tom is closed for business, but please continue to worship me, light candles, and send money.
You know, I have to appreciate his panache in simultaneously aligning himself with some of the most famous people who ever surprised the world by dying, and also with some of the most famous people who are suspected by some not to have died.
Yes.
There was another one with, shall we say, some panache that was published just this year in the Indianapolis Star. And this is for Frederick Hoffman, who wrote in his own obituary, I've been medically fragile my entire life, but I think I did pretty well. Up till now, that is. I would like to credit the doctors, nurses, and other healthcare providers in Cleveland and Indianapolis. You all cared for me with state of the art treatment and empathy, which allowed me to live well beyond my expires by date. Except Anita. I never liked you, Anita. Give a man some privacy when he has to poop. Peace out to all my family and any friends left in Cleveland, but not you, Ralph. You're a turd. There will be no visitation or service since my sister refuses to honor my request to prop me up on a chair in the corner with an illegal cigarette in my hand so I will look my most natural best. Instead, if you feel inclined, raise a glass of your favorite beverage, pour off a little for your homie, and think about some good time we had. I will be cremated and my ashes given to Sister Sue, who will keep and care for them, I'm sure, until they no longer match her decor.
I think it's the only obit I've ever read that talks about pooping.
I can't think of another.
One of my favorite obits that I've ever read, and that went pretty viral almost 10 years ago in 2012, when it was kind of an early example of a viral obit, even, was for Val Patterson, is published in the Salt Lake Tribune, and it went viral because it is great. Here's an excerpt. Now that I have gone to my reward, I have confessions and things I should now say. As it turns out, I am the guy who stole the safe from the Motorview Drive-In back in June 1971. I could have left that unsaid, but I wanted to get it off my chest. Also, I really am not a PhD. What happened was that the day I went to pay off my college student loan at the U of U, the girl working there put my receipt into the wrong stack, and 2 weeks later, a PhD diploma came in the mail. I didn't even graduate. I only had about 3 years of college credit. In fact, I never did even learn what the letters PhD even stood for. For all of the electronic engineers I have worked with, I'm sorry, but you have to admit my designs always worked very well and were well engineered, and I always made you laugh at work. Now, to that really mean park ranger, after all, it was me that rolled those rocks into your geyser and ruined it. I did notice a few years later that you did get Old Faithful working again. To Disneyland, you can now throw away that banned for life file that you have on me. I'm not a problem anymore. And SeaWorld San Diego too, if you read this.
You know, it leaves me wondering which of these things are completely made up
I
and which
know.
of them have a grain of truth to them.
I know. I feel like the PhD thing is especially believable, but I don't know. Maybe not.
I was going to say the thing about stealing the safe was particularly believable.
That too. Yeah, but maybe not. It could all be made up. Maybe this one belonged in that last category of, made up legacies.
Well, I appreciate in any case the idea that the obituary can be seen as one last chance for confession.
Yes.
Different kind of confession. Just last year, there was an obituary in the Wellsboro Gazette in Pennsylvania for Ruth Soule. I'm not sure. Soul.
Soul, maybe?
And the relevant part was just the beginning, which started, if you're reading this, I have apparently died today, Tuesday, January 28th, 2020. I probably should have forwarded that chain letter. We all wonder.
Yep. Yeah, we know. One last one. This was another one that was short and sweet and just funny the whole way through. This was published just last month in the Tampa Bay Times for Maynard Herson. This is the entire obit. Herson, Maynard, croaked at the age of 90 years old on August 7th, 2021. I wrote this obit and paid for it. A fearful child who overcame his fears to become a military officer, scuba, and skydiver. Light plane, slider pilot, and entrepreneur. In the end, I was not afraid of anything. I will be remembered for a while by my family, all of whose names I am far too cheap to list, and a few friends. I had a pretty good life, and everyone dies. Bye-bye.
Wow.
Yeah, says it all.
On that note, that is our show for today. Thank you to all the families who shared these lovely tributes with the world. And thank you to all Legacy.com's newspaper partners in towns all across America. Thank you to my co-host, Linnea Crowther, and to our producer, John Maxwell. Thank you also to Legacy.com, where you can now honor a loved one's memory by planting memorial trees in their name. Just visit Legacy.com/trees. To hear more life stories like these, you can subscribe to Immortalized on your favorite podcast app. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just look up Legacy.com on YouTube. And if you're on Facebook, you can follow Legacy.com there for daily updates. Thanks for listening.